looking to probably start in a minute or so. Just we usually say that these things begin at 11 o'clock, and then attendees sort of log in around about 11 o'clock, and it's usually around about 3 or 4 minutes past by the time everyone's got settled. So I'll probably do the same thing, which is just give it a minute or so. But for those of you that are already on, really appreciate you joining us this morning. We should be here for about an hour, and I'm hoping it's going to be quite an informative webinar. Let's see how that goes. So I'll probably give it another minute or so before we start. So appreciate everybody waiting, and thanks very much for attending this morning. I can see that the participant list is growing, so I'm going to sort of give it a minute or so. Okay, so I think we're good to go now. So good morning. Thank you very much for attending today. This morning, I'm going to give a very brief and basic overview of ransomware for those that may have been familiar with the term, but not actually necessarily familiar with what it is. This will be a reasonably non-technical presentation, and I'll be joined by Andy Scott, our Head of Technical Services, for 1 or 2 slides at the end of the presentation. So I just want you to focus on the screen that you're seeing in front of you at the moment, where it displays what looks initially like a rather innocuous message. All of your files are encrypted. Find readme.b46 blah blah blah.txt and follow the instructions. And I want you to imagine for a moment that is displayed on your desktop when you come into work this morning. And you're wondering how it's actually got there. You move your mouse over it, it doesn't seem to move. You click your keyboard, it doesn't seem to be having any response. And anything and everything you do seems to be totally unresponsive. And so it's a little bit of an annoyance at the moment. You may be a little bit computer savvy, so you decide to reboot your computer and thinking that will actually clear the message. And then strangely enough, you actually find that once the computer's rebooted, you're seeing exactly the same text displayed on your screen. And so you step outside, scratching your head a little bit, and you notice the office is a little bit quieter than it might usually be. And people are also looking blankly at the screens. And as you wander around, you see that actually they're all experiencing the same message. And the phones aren't ringing as much as they used to do. And the office has got some form of a quiet, perhaps the calm before the storm. You wander back into your office, you pick up the phone, you ring whoever's responsible for IT and say, I've got this weird message on my screen. And you sort of get the response, yeah, we've got a bit of a problem and we're working on it. And that's sort of how it starts. And you may just see the red arrow that is pointing to the readme.txt file. I want you to just focus on that for a second, because that is the instructions that an attacker has placed on the desktop of every computer with instructions on how to pay a ransom to remove the encryption that has now found its way across all of your data. And so the calm before the storm is really now starting to generate, and we're only about 2 to 3 minutes into the working day, and well, we'll discuss what happens shortly. My name's Tobias. I'm the managing director and co-founder of CYFOR and Intellect. CYFOR is a UK-based company. We're a leading cybersecurity firm of experts. We specialize in computer forensics, litigation support, and we have national and international clients. I'm also managing director of Intellect, which is a company which is based outside of the United Kingdom jurisdiction and is co-founded and staffed with former Israeli military intelligence cyber experts who, along with the experts that CYFOR employs, works on these kind of cases and forms part of our incident response team for matters such as this. So let us talk about ransomware for a second. I want to start off with what ransomware isn't, actually. Ransomware is not something that only affects large organizations that are in the public domain that you see in the press and the media. It's not something that affects somebody else because we're okay. And it's definitely not going away, as we'll see a little bit later on with the statistics that we have. Be under no illusion that ransomware itself is a business. It is a business that is growing nationally, internationally, and growing exponentially. It's highly sophisticated and run by highly sophisticated criminal gangs. Long gone are the days of ransomware just being sent out just to see if it works, just to cause some disruption and foolery. It is a unbelievably growing form of criminal enterprise. It is extremely lucrative for those attackers. They can sit anywhere in the world and they can realize hundreds of thousands of pounds for executing a little bit of code that brings businesses and organizations to the knees. Ransomware gangs now collude with other gangs, share information, share data, and businesses and organizations that have been compromised will find that they are susceptible to attack going forwards, because the data and the information and a scenario of what happened gets shared on the dark web. They're interested in cash and cash only, and regrettably, it's not in a form of currency that we are traditionally used to dealing with. And so that presents a problem in itself. But as we'll see a little bit later, there is now a growing form of, if you like, criminal ethics, and we'll talk about that very briefly later. Ransomware as a service, you may be familiar with the expression software as a service, where now, long gone are the days of buying a piece of software in the PC world, taking out a CD and DVD and installing it into your computer. Software is now available to be used online, such as the development of the World Wide Web. We can now execute and run code that is stored in the cloud, and our accounting systems and CRM systems no longer need to be installed locally on local computers. They can be installed in the cloud. And ransomware is very much going a similar way. There are organizations out there that do ransomware as a service. A computer geek will write the code, and they'll hand it over to, they don't want to be involved in the extortion side of the business, so they'll hand it over to a criminal gang. They'll execute the code, and they'll share the rewards. It really has become an international business, but regrettably one that involves criminal enterprise. These gangs are transient, very difficult to pin down. They can operate from anywhere in the world that has an internet connection. They can use a burner phone to create that internet connection. They're not operating on conventional computer platforms, and so they're very difficult to trace. And they can close the lid of a laptop, move to a different part of the town, country, or even world, which makes finding them and tracking them down difficult. And what I can tell you is that although the police will let you know that they have an interest and they're doing everything they can to track these criminal enterprises down, it is very unlikely that the police are going to have any interest whatsoever if your organization becomes susceptible to ransomware, unless there is a serious threat to public interest, such as the infection that happened not so long ago with the National Health Service, or some high-profile organisations such as Manchester United recently, then they're really not going to pay much attention to the crisis that is now unfolding. And so the background to this seminar and to our business is that recently we have been contacted by more and more small to medium-sized enterprises who have been infected with some form of ransomware, which has literally crippled their businesses instantly. None of the organizations that I'm referring to today were necessarily large household names. Simply small to medium-sized enterprises, or even or potentially large enterprises, but not necessarily in the public domain so much, that woke up one morning to find out that they were locked out of their systems. In some instances, the organizations paid the ransom, and we'll discuss why or why not that should happen shortly. And the scenario I'm going to run through briefly this morning is the anatomy, basic anatomy of one of those attacks. This date and timeline is genuine. The description of the firm is genuine. 26th of February of this year, a professional services firm in London came into the office and found their screen had the representation as depicted in the top right-hand side of the display you're looking at now. All of your files are encrypted. Find the readme.txt file and follow the instructions. The screen below is once the instructions have been followed, and basically presented the screen that you'll see a few times through this presentation. And it tells of the value of ransom that the attackers are looking for, which was $310,000, and that they had, at the time, I think 5 days at the time we took the screenshot, some time had elapsed in order to pay it. If that was not achieved, the ransom would double. And so we would go from $310,000 to a ransom of $620,000. And as we'll discuss a little bit later on, I'll tell you some of the other things that they threatened should the ransom not be paid. And so where are we now? We're probably now 9:05, maybe 9:10 in the morning of this particular day, obviously not now, of this particular day, and we're now locked out. We have no access to our computer systems whatsoever. Our data has been encrypted. Our email systems have been compromised. We can't trust them if we even have access to them. We don't know who owes us money because we can't access our finance systems. We don't know who we owe money to. We actually can't get hold of our order system. So if we're dealing with clients that we provide a product to, we don't know where their orders are up to. We don't know who we need to ship orders to. And if we're providing a service, we can't provide that service any longer because we can't get access to the data needed to do that. And in worst case scenarios, if you're using modern voice over IP telecom systems, our particular client was unable to use their local telephone system. It had simply stopped working. And so they were now resorting to mobile telephones, but with no access to the clients, with no access to the client telephone numbers, and worse still, their clients couldn't telephone in. Personally identifiable information has been exfiltrated from the business, so all data is now being copied out, ready to be sold potentially on the dark web. And the threat actors themselves are now threatening to release that data, notify the media, notify regulatory agencies, and sell the data on the web. And we're now only 10 to 15 minutes into the start of the day. The client had some end of life, or what we would call legacy systems, so older systems that were fully functioning, but they had no support available to them. Companies that had written their products, those products had ceased to exist, or they've moved on to more modern systems. There was no support available, and they were locked out of those. And so potentially recovering them was going to be difficult. And even if we did recover them, there was no guarantee that they were going to function fully afterwards. In this particular scenario, backups hadn't been taken as effectively as should have been, but we will presume for the moment that backups had been taken from an organization that may be infected. But it used to be the fact that you could rely on a backup, and you can for certain things. The difficulty with backups is that these threat actors no longer send the code in on day one and execute it 5 minutes afterwards. Usually what happens is that your system will have been compromised days, weeks, potentially months beforehand, and a second event is waiting to happen before it actually executes its code. And that could be something as innocuous as somebody clicking on a file that they hadn't seen before that's been laying dormant in a folder somewhere. And so the difficulty is that immediately going to backups doesn't necessarily mean to say that the code isn't just sat there waiting to be re-executed at another stage. So backups potentially can't be trusted. In one particular case that we've had, the backups actually were encrypted themselves because they were left on the same network. And so it made it really difficult to do recovery, and it was channeling all efforts towards paying the ransom. And as you can see, the ransom, I just want to remind you of the ransom demand, which is now being displayed across virtually all screens within the business. And so we've now got some immediate considerations, which a lot of organisations haven't prepared for, but the purpose of today is to try and get you to think about those. The epicenter of life now is the business itself and how to get back to normality. We're at risk from a number of different areas, starting potentially with clients. You're unable to service clients. You probably don't even have access to telephone numbers to telephone them. Any inbound telephone calls, if your telephone system has gone down, aren't coming through. Clients are potentially getting a discontinued tone, or they're just getting a ringing or engaged tone. And even if your system hasn't gone down and they're ringing in, there's very little that you can actually tell them. In fact, what do you tell them? Because you don't necessarily want everyone to know the difficulties that you're experiencing this morning, but there is going to be a point in time where you might have to. It's very possible that you have inadvertently transferred the malicious code onto their systems, and this needs to be explored. And it's very possible that some of your clients are experiencing their own problems this morning, which may have manifested themselves from malicious code that resides on your network. And clearly your ongoing relationship with them is going to have to be managed very, very carefully. Depending upon the services that you provide to them will depend on whether they trust you going forward to maintain a business relationship. Moving round, we've got considerations with staff. They're going to be concerned. They don't know what's happening. They're locked out of their own workstations. And it isn't going to take long to realize that the business itself is under threat and that a ransomware attack has taken place. They'll be feeling potentially vulnerable. Is the business going to continue? Will it be able to recover from this? Is their job safe and secure? What do they tell clients and suppliers that are ringing through to the business or managing to contact you one way or the other? Is it possible that one of your staff themselves has inadvertently executed the code and they've realized this now? How is that particular individual feeling? And so we're now starting to see a manifestation, a mushrooming effect of problems. And maybe now it's 9:25 in the morning and we've got multiple threats coming into the business. Depending on what your business actually does, you may have regulatory and statutory considerations. Is it a reportable situation? It probably is. How will you mitigate to whoever you report to, what you've done, what you're doing? Are you going to be liable for a fine from the Information Commissioner's Office? Have you breached GDPR? And how are you going to manage all of this? And we still haven't got to the point of trying to recover the business to a functioning platform. And then inevitably, the chances of it leaking into the media are reasonable, depending on the size of your business. It is certainly something of interest to the media. And that particular story has to be managed because the wrong message going out to the world is not going to do your business any good. It's going to harm your reputation and it's going to harm your brand. And so we've got to think about how we're going to deal with this. And so I'm going to talk about some response stages here, most of which would be handed over to a third-party expert. But the first thing to do is take stock of the situation, resist the temptation to panic. Very difficult, okay? I want you to imagine for a second that basically somebody has taken a large container, placed it over your business premises, locked the doors, and there's only one person that has the key. You know that things are going on the inside, but you have no control over them whatsoever. And you're stood outside, banging on the door, trying to get in. And that's what it feels like when you are in the middle of a ransomware attack and have no access to any of your data and any of your systems. So for a few seconds, you need to sit down and think and start to formulate a plan. And we will talk about those plans going forward. Once you've identified that you have got a bit of a predicament going on, then obviously you need to react. You've got to do something. Feel free to contact your IT team. Feel free to contact your external IT provider. But it's fair to say that if you've been attacked, that the security that was being provided was probably not sufficient enough. And you really need to think about bringing in a third-party expert who is familiar with cybercrime, cyber responses, and how to help you recover from this situation. And I think it's fair to say that unless a ransom is paid, it is very, very difficult to recover in a quick time frame. And so you should start to think of at least having a downtime of 1 to 7 working days. And that really is a downtime where your normal business is not functioning as it would. Now, what we've found in most cases, in many cases, is that our clients tend not to bring in a third party, tend not to contact somebody like CYFOR for 3, maybe 4 days, which is an unbelievable amount of time, considering that in the background, your data is probably being copied, it's probably being exfiltrated out of the business, it's being encrypted, and you're wasting time. Important information that we might be able to recover is being wasted in that frame. So the react element of this, I've given a 24-hour time frame to. We really want companies to react far quicker than this, and to recognize that they've got an issue, and to bring in a third party to assist with that recovery process. And the final 2 stages, we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail shortly, is a remediating review process. And so once we've managed to get a situation where you've recovered to a normal working environment, and that may be because we paid a ransom, it may be because we've not paid a ransom and we've rebuilt systems, you then need to step up security. And then this is investigating the breach, finding out how the malicious code came to reside on your system, and then conducting a constant review of your security or your data security. And regrettably, we tend to find that companies that have had this sprung on them, as soon as they've reached the end of the recovery stage, slow down the remediation and the review, only to find themselves reinfected 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, perhaps by a different threat actor who has bought the information from the dark web and knows that you've been vulnerable. And so I cannot stress enough the importance of ensuring that you complete the process and constantly look at reviewing your security systems and remediating. It can be a little bit of a painful process. It involves changing passwords regularly and having a very complex password structure. And it's a little bit like insurance, regrettably, in that you sort of feel reluctant to take it on board until you actually need it, and then it becomes a bit of a lifesaver. And so, assuming that we get to a point where you've called in somebody, this is a typical methodology that we would use to assist in your response. We initiate our own cyber incident response team to assist with the situation. We dedicate one of our offices here to become an incident control room, because these situations tend to start, well, I'm not quite sure why, but tend to start at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and require us to work quite late through the night, dealing with, if you like, a hostage taker, and in trying to get data released if we go down the paying the ransom route. Our response team, and any response team, should have a senior member of staff on it. It should be available 24/7, as ours would be. And then we will then initiate a recovery team to assist getting your business back up and running, a remediation team to help going forward, to fix any holes that we found in your network infrastructure, and then a negotiation team if you decide to go down the route of paying the ransom. And I will talk about paying the ransom, the statistics for how many companies do, what kind of money is they're paying. But what I want to now do is just go back to that little text message that we found on the desktop. Excuse me a second. And opening up the screen starts to give a series of instructions. And so we'll now go back to talking about how sophisticated these attackers are. given a lot of thought about how they are going to go around about extorting money from people. And they're trying to introduce an element of ethics into it, which is interesting at best. And so in this particular case, these screens are genuine screens copied from a recent attack that we dealt with. And they claim that they will not attack anybody that is involved in education, not-for-profit or government. They're only going after companies that can afford to pay. They don't want to inconvenience a hospital or anything of that nature. How very kind of them. What else do they do? Well, they claim that they don't want to destroy your business entirely. And so they analyze your business. And they may do this by looking on publicly available information that's in the public domain. They have probably got access to financial records, which have either been exfiltrated from your own data set, or very easily they've just gone online and had a look at any accounts that you may or may not have filed. And so what they do is they set a value that they believe you're in a position to afford. They don't know whether you can or you can't afford it, but they won't necessarily ask a business that turns over £1 million to pay £1 million ransom. It's very unlikely you're going to be in a position to do that. And so they choose a level which they believe is affordable to you, that makes your decision-making process easier, and it makes the likelihood of them getting a payout substantially higher. They claim to guarantee that they will provide the unencryption password, and I have to say that in this particular case, a ransom was paid, which we'll talk about in a second, and decryption keys were provided. This particular organization give technical support, and so that once the decryption process is started, any technical difficulties that are faced, they will assist with. But they also then talk about what they will do if you don't pay. And in this respect, they will publish your data. They will send notification to as many people as they can that your data has been compromised and leaked. And they also claim that they will never provide you with the decryptor keys, leaving your data locked out from yourselves forever. And just to demonstrate this fact, here is one of their screens where they have clearly compromised. These are American organizations, and they have basically put their data up for sale on the dark web for anybody else to buy and do what they want with it, or simply just to come back to you and threaten with further release of that data. And so, you know, this demonstrates how sophisticated these guys are in doing what they do. So the prospect of now being locked out of your business, maybe 35, 40 minutes has elapsed. You realize that you have got no access to anything, you are locked out. What are the considerations with paying a ransom demand? It is impossible to give a broad brush answer to that question. It really does depend on each individual company's circumstances. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Each set of circumstances is completely unique. As a company, we would advise against paying the ransom, but the truth of that matter is that's not our decision to make. We will happily engage with you as to the pros and cons and the whys and the wherefores and the process of how it should be done. But really, we need to take that decision, which potentially can be guided by us. If you think you have confidence in the ability to restore data, if we think that your backup systems may be appropriate, if we can hygiene them, we may suggest that you don't pay the ransom. But there is a balance to be drawn here between cost of paying a ransom, cost of services to get you back up and running, and time frame. And so what are the benefits of paying? Well, it's potentially the quickest option. Now I'm going to give a caveat here and move over to the right-hand side. We could pay this ransom and have no guarantee whatsoever that encryption keys will be provided. You are effectively sending money which can't be traced into a big black hole and hoping that a decryption key will be provided. What I can say is that, as I've mentioned earlier, this is a sophisticated business. And so the threat actors want to fulfill their obligations, because otherwise it would get quickly around that by paying a ransom, you're not getting the decryptor keys anyway, and therefore their business would collapse. And so in all the cases that we have been involved in where a ransom has been paid, decryptor keys have been provided. But I cannot stress that once that money is sent, it can't be recovered, it can't be traced, and we are relying on the, in inverted commas, business ethics of the threat actor we're dealing with to provide decryptor keys. But returning back to payment, assuming that the ethics of the threat actor are good, it's the quickest option. A decryptor key is usually provided immediately, and we can then start going about checking the decryptor key works, recovering data for you. It's potentially the least costly option. If the ransom has been set at a reasonable level, it could be the least costly option for you. It may also be that you've got little choice. If the services that you provide are mission critical to your clients, you really may have no choice in which to get back up and running. And again, we can look at the considerations, the regulatory considerations, in that your data won't necessarily have been sold, distributed, released, and you may be able to keep the information of the breach from going public. The difficulty in not paying is, or if you don't pay, then if it gets out, it can look particularly poor that you have effectively encouraged further crime by paying the ransom. You may be in breach of statutory, regulatory restrictions. Some countries forbid organizations from engaging with these kind of individuals. The difficulty in this is that your regulatory organization really isn't interested in your business. It's not interested in your business continuity. It's just interested in making sure that you remain above board, that the organization, that the industry itself is not engaging with criminal activity. But that's very, very easy to say when you've got salaries to pay, a business to run, clients to service, and you really can't do that unless you get access to your data. And so it's quite an emotional, and we have had many situations where clients that we're dealing with are very emotional, very highly charged, arguing amongst their own board, with 50% of the board wanting to pay and 50% not wanting to pay. And that is one of the reasons why we always advocate that if you are going to engage with the attackers, it is not done with somebody from your firm. If you like, it takes the emotion out of it, although it's not uncommon for us to become quite emotional about dealing with these individuals as well. So let's just talk about what happens if we do decide to chat with them. This is typically the chat screen that would be displayed. And you'll see on the right-hand side a little chat dialog box. Now, this can't be accessed through conventional means. We have equipment that we call dirty machines that are situated in a particular location that allow us to engage with the attackers. They will have provided a link and we will then log on. And typically, there's the chat box. Typically, we get the first 3 or 4 messages are the same. Once we've initiated, they'll come back and say, hello, we're going to publish your data. Well, we know that. We're looking at a dialog box that tells us that. We've agonized many, many times on what our opening gambit should be, and we typically start with something along these lines. We don't go on arrogantly. We basically have to accept where we are, and that is one of the best methods of engaging with these people. And effectively what we're asking for is if we pay you quickly, will you give us our data back quickly? And more importantly, will you give us a discount? And I've never known a situation whereby they don't come back with and say, give us an offer and we'll consider it. This is a very, very difficult situation, and we have to discuss with you, if you've decided to go down the pay the ransomware route, the pros and cons of the negotiation process. Regrettably, on one particular occasion, when an offer was made, the threat actors considered it to be insulting to them. They doubled the ransom and they halved the amount of time that we were able to pay it, and they did that instantly. It's very difficult to know the level at which to make an offer. We ask, CYFOR would ask, Intellect would ask, we ask, and we hope for the best that they will work with us to try and get an achievable amount. But invariably, it is usually down to us to put forward a monetary amount that we hope is less than they've originally asked for, and that they don't punish us for doing that negotiation. But it is a very, very difficult process. In this particular case, we were successful in negotiating a ransom down from $310,000 to $251,000. It took about 1.5 days. Typically, it happens all the way through the night. We end up having, and I'm not going to go through the whole dialogue boxes because there's quite a few, but we effectively got to a point where we'd agreed $251,000. But paying that that money is not easy. First of all, we can't pay it in a traditional currency, so we can't pay it in sterling or dollars. The transfer of it is not easy at all, and so we originally asked for Monero, and that was the currency that we actually paid in the end. The threat actors were happy with any form of cryptocurrency, and that is the only currency that they will accept. And this is because cryptocurrency is untraceable. It can't be identified where it's gone. Once you send it, it goes into again a huge big black hole that you can't recover the money back from. And this is the currency of all of these kind of threat actors. Now, we considered Bitcoin originally because it's the one that everybody knows. But in transferring or exchanging sterling amounts into Bitcoin of this value, we have to use a third-party broker, and this particular broker took a 20% fee. And so basically, a further 20% of funds were just going to be lost to the exchange itself. Using another currency called Monero, the fee was much less. I think it was around about 5%. And so we are familiar with brokers that operate in Europe. They are above board and legal, because trading in of cryptocurrency is not illegal in itself. But of course, we're also sending funds to, if you like, a third party to convert into a cryptocurrency. And the cheapest one that we found at that time was Monero, and that is the product that we used. The difficulty again with a cryptocurrency is that the exchange rates are fluctuating quite dramatically, literally hour by hour. If you followed Bitcoin, you've seen it's had a dramatic rise, it's had a dramatic fall, and this happens intraday. And so on this particular occasion, what we actually had was we'd agreed a dollar amount. We converted that into Monero. We sent a test transaction. We asked for proof of life, what we call proof of life, which is that they can decrypt the files. And then once that was done, we had no choice whatsoever but to send the remaining funds. When it was received at the threat actors or the attackers, it turned out that we were effectively $3,000 to $4,000 short of the $251,000 that we'd agreed. And we basically communicated with them and said, look, it's very difficult. The exchange rate is changing all the time. You've had a sizable chunk of money. Will you release the decryption keys? And you know what? After reasonable credit to them, they released the decryption keys, and we were able to go about spending 4 or 5 days restoring the systems for this particular client. And so that is typically how the negotiation goes. It is left to us or to whoever you engaged to work with the attackers to bring about a reasonable negotiation and try and get the ransom down, which is not particularly easy to do. This particular organization makes a donation to charity after every ransom is paid. I don't think we got to choose it. That's not related to this particular one, but this is just to try and encourage that they are an ethical criminal organization. It's laughable, but that's what they do. So they have masterminded their own business process and give donations to charity, which they claim, is you giving that donation to charity, but it doesn't make things necessarily feel much better for those that are on the end of it. And so that is roughly, how a negotiation goes. And I just want to again just draw your attention back. I mean, this is a fixed screenshot here, but this is all that you will be looking at for a period of days, weeks, or however long it takes to recover. And if you can see my mouse here, as I said, it is fixed because it is a screenshot. This is counting down all the time. Now, the threat actors themselves have probably got multiple attacks going on. And the way that we see it is that basically they're sat in a room, they're watching half a dozen of these, they're negotiating with half a dozen people. And what they're really looking to do is get funds from you as quickly as possible and move on to the next target. And so it is in their interests to give a discount, and it is in their interests to release the decryptor keys. It doesn't necessarily make you as the target business feel that much better about the situation. So where is ransomware in global terms, and how likely is it to affect an organization such as yours or one of your clients? Well, cybercrime is certainly growing. It is far easier to commit a cybercrime than to walk into a bank these days with a shotgun and a balaclava and extort money over the counter. It is growing exponentially and disproportionately. And ransomware itself is significantly on the rise. It is very easy, as we'll look in a second, to infiltrate into a business, and it's just simply not going away. It is expected to increase far more than any other type of cybercrime. Some cybercrimes are committed just for disruption. This is committed for the extortion of cash. Most companies that were infected by ransomware were infected for a minimum of 6 working days. I've got some slides shortly which will show companies you may be familiar with being down for much longer periods of times than that. 52% of victims decided that payment was in their best interests. And last year alone, over £200 million was paid out by UK organisations in ransoms. Regrettably, 60% of the smaller ones failed as a business because, well, for various reasons, they were unable to recover. And so it is a very, very nasty situation that we're facing in the United Kingdom and globally, because these crimes are very, very easy to perpetrate. And so you're probably sort of thinking for a second, well, I think we're fine. Are we vulnerable as a business? Are my clients vulnerable if you're a professional services firm? And you're probably thinking, well, no one's going to bother with us. Nobody's interested in us. We're not in the papers. We're not in the media. We've got antivirus, so nothing can get through. And we've got backups. We take backups religiously every day. The amount of times I've heard, oh, well, we use an external IT company. So, we've got the best security in the world. And then the final one is, well, we've got insurance, which is great. but we all know how difficult it is getting an insurance company to pay. I'm not suggesting they won't, but what I am suggesting is that you picking up the telephone to them and telling them that your business has just been shut down and you're going to put a claim on the insurance policy is not going to result in a check being sent over that day. They're going to know what your security systems were like. Have you complied with any terms and conditions? Does your insurance actually cover the threat that you're experiencing? You may have cyber insurance to help you recover, but it may not pay in the actual the ransom itself. And so all of these things that I've just mentioned are in no way, shape, or form capable of ensuring that you're not vulnerable. It is fair to say that my business is involved in cybersecurity, and I cannot guarantee that my business is 100% fully protected. The threat is changing every single day, and we have to be watching every single day to ensure that we're not compromised. And so if you are connected to the internet, if you use computer equipment, if you send and receive emails, if you have remote access, if you log on to the internet, if you regularly follow links that have been sent to you, if documents are sent to you in your email system as PDFs or Word docs, then you're vulnerable. And I would imagine most companies are doing that every single day of the week. And the code itself is infiltrated in these links. It's infiltrated into documents that look innocuous, and clever threat actors now are also aware of the kind of correspondence that you might be expecting. It's fair to say that in my office, an email is received probably once a week. It could even be daily by my finance team that purports to come from me, Joel Tobias, and asks my team to transfer funds outside of the business. And so we have to have a system now where my team know when it is actually me. And it's very, very easy for a member of your team even to receive an email that purports to be from one of their colleagues or one of their seniors that says, please take a look at the attached document. And they open that document, there's nothing in it, but actually it's executing code to sit behind the scenes and actually then deploy in 2-3 days, 4 weeks, 5 months, or when another action is taken. And so we're just referring back to we have antivirus, we have backups, we have an IT manager, etc. Well, it's fair to say that so did all of these companies. TravelX, you may be aware of, were hit with a ransom demand in Christmas just gone. As I understand it, they paid a $4.5 million dollar ransom, and they were offline for the best part of 3 weeks. Redcar Council, Racket Ben Kaiser, you'll probably be familiar with or potentially familiar with. NHS lost 19,000 appointments, cost them 92 million. And so it goes on. And these are all UK organizations, predominantly, who would certainly have had an amazing IT infrastructure with IT security, and were hit and suffered a loss as a result of having cryptoware set about their system. So I've got 2 slides left now. I'm going to hand over to Andy Scott, who is just very briefly going to talk about prevention being better than cure. And if Andy, if you're there, if you could then pick up on this slide, and then the following slide is literally the end of the day for questions and answers. So Andy, if you could pick up on this, please, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks very much, Joel, and
no problem.
Appreciate people's continuing attention. So prevention is better than cure. So what I'm going to basically do is ask you a number of questions for you to think about as you leave the presentation. So, when's the last time you had an independent security review? So that's not your IT people telling you everything's okay. They would love to tell you that all the time. When's the last time you had a pen test? We all put things off like that. Do you have Cyber Essentials Plus? Cyber Essentials is great. Cyber Essentials Plus gives you that external independent view. If you're much larger, ISO 27001 might be the way to go for you as well. When's the last time you reviewed and tested your policies and procedures? Do you actually have an incident response plan? When's the last time you tested your business continuity, your disaster recovery? Cyber attacks, as Joel has explained, are very sophisticated. They normally are outside the normal realm of your normal IT support people. Do they have first responder training? Things like that. I worked for the NHS. We had an incident. The IT support people wanted to get in and help straight away. It was a snuff video on a desktop. So they picked it up and put it on network share, thinking that they were doing the right thing, removing it from that particular person's machine. Of course, they've gone to effectively a crime scene. They've looked around the dead body. They've picked it up and slung it into the market square by putting it on the network share. Not very useful as a first response. Patching, is your patching up to date? Pretty basic, really. Joel talked about backups. What state are your backups in? Have you tested them? Are they still online? Because backups traditionally are there for integrity and availability, but now we need to think about them being confidential as well. So in terms of backups, we now advise clients to consider cyber recovery, which is a slightly different form of backup and DR strategy. What state is your endpoint protection in? So we obviously tend to talk about the perimeter, but really it's the data that we're looking after. So access control. Do you know what data you have? Do you know where it is? Do you know why you have that data still? Should it be deleted under GDPR? Where is it? Who has access? Why do they have access to it? Really focusing on not having generic accounts so that all activity can be audited and pointed towards specific users. SEAM and SOC, so Security Incident Event Monitoring and Security Operations Center, they work together. What activity is your SEAM monitoring? How quickly are you alerted? How quickly can you respond? A recent ransomware attack that we dealt with here, the client was alerted by their SEAM 7 hours before anyone actually got to action that particular alert. Those 7 hours were vital in dealing with the very first parts of the attack. Education and training. When's the last time you did a phishing campaign with your staff? What happened? How many of them actually clicked the link? Again, in our experience, it's something that's talked about a lot, but it still remains an issue. Education and training for the people who are responding to the attack. So your cyber incident response team, your first responders, they also need specialist training. And then finally, Joel did talk about risk management, risk treatment. We avoid, mitigate, accept, or in this case, attempt to transfer the risk by the insurance. Check. Have you actually got cyber insurance? How much does it cover? Does it cover paying the ransom or does it not? What do you need to do first? What are the prerequisites? What does your security landscape need to look like so that your insurance keeps you covered? Lots of questions there for you to consider.
Thanks, Andy. I'm presuming that you finished that particular one. That's a pretty good summary there. And I'm going to now pretty much move on to my last screen now, which is, you probably found this interesting, but it could never happen to us until it does. All I'd like you to take away from this is give some thought to what has been said to you this morning. Think about what would happen to your business or one of your clients' businesses if they are at the wrong end of a ransomware attack. Think about some of the ideas that Andy has just mentioned previously regarding what you can do to prevent rather than cure. And if there's anything that me or my team can do going forward to assist you, obviously we'd be happy to do so. Certainly happy to have a brief conversation. And unless there are any questions, I'm going to, which can be put through on the questions and answers. I think there's one coming through, yeah. So how do we? I've got a question here. How do we contact you if we think we're suffering an attack? Thanks. So obviously, we can be contacted by our normal telephone numbers, 0161 797 8123. We have always operated a 24/7 response line, and so out of hours, the telephone would go to one of our response team, and we're available to put an instant response in pretty much any time. That's 24/7, 365, and so that's not a problem. If it's just for a basic chat or a discussion, contact us by email or through our, which can be found through our website, www.cyfor.co.uk, or as I say, through our telephone, 0161 797 8123. That's it. That's the only question I've had so far, so I can answer that, which I've done. Hit done, and that's good. And just let me check and see if another one has popped up. Can you ever decrypt our files? Decryption is a very is an interesting one. So the files are obviously decrypted. Encrypted. There are some available decryptor keys for some of the malware that has been around for a while. We would always check. So the first thing that we do if we're instructed is we have a look at what we think it may have been encrypted with, and we will try some of the known decryptor keys. If those are not successful, I think it would be fair to say that it is going to be costly, time-consuming, and have a very low success rate within the timeframes that are going to be available to you to decrypt without paying the ransom. And so I think it's fair to say that decryption is, without the decryption key, is going to be particularly difficult. So let's have a quick. If the victim decides to, I've got one from Joni here. If the victim decides to pay the ransom, you mentioned a third party would help with payment. Do they conduct sanction checks, or do you? No. Sorry, I'm going to answer that better. Payment of the ransom is not something that we would recommend. Regrettably, payment of a ransom is, as I've said, often the quickest way. It would be wrong for us to recommend it in general terms. In terms of sanctions and anything else of that nature, we will give guidance, but we would recommend liaising with your approved law firm or with a law firm. We do have some that specialize, most of our clients are lawyers, to be fair. We do have some that specialize in this. It's a very, very difficult situation because of regulatory considerations. And so it's a tough call. But no, we don't get involved in that side of it. And the other thing that we won't do is we will not touch the funds. We will advise, we will introduce, we would recommend, and we will guide through the process. But we don't want to be touching the funds for a whole host of reasons. In terms of third-party check with the brokers that we use, then we have used them successfully on a number of occasions and are comfortable with their honesty in that particular in that respect. But in terms of sanctions and everything, that is something that needs to be thought out separately, effectively. So I'm just going to have an answer to that one, and I think that's all the open questions so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang around now for another couple of minutes, just in case anybody pops up a question, and then I will end the presentation. But suffice to say, I hope you found it interesting. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to join this morning. And as I've said, if you feel that you want to contact us for anything, there's no charge for that whatsoever at all. Just drop us a line or give us a telephone call and we'll do our very best to help you. Thank you very much for attending this morning and have a great day.